Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Ethanol Producer Magazine podcast. This week, we're speaking with Elizabeth Burns-Thompson, Vice President of Government and Public Affairs with Navigator CO2. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for being a part of our podcast today. So just to get us started, could you give our audience a quick summary of what Navigator CO2 does and what the Heartland Greenway project is?
Sure. So, at a high level, I talk about our project as a carbon management platform. Truly, and I'm sure we'll get into the weeds on exactly what that means and some of the latest announcements that we've had that are kind of bringing that to life. But at its core, Navigator and the team I work with is a traditional midstream company, meaning the folks that are part of our network are really the professionals and leaders in both the design, construction, and operation of midstream or pipeline infrastructure. Navigator has had two other iterations of the company where they've developed pipeline assets predominantly throughout the southern part of the United States. We have built out the team since then to bring in additional expertise specifically in the CO2 space, as well as bringing in kind of the existing expertise of each of those subset areas to apply to the project that we're going to talk about here today, the Heartland Greenway. So again, as I mentioned, I should say to talk a little bit more about the project itself, it is at its core about, at least in phase one, I should say, 1,300 miles of new pipeline infrastructure that we'll be developing across 5 states in the Midwest. That footprint, and for those that are curious, we do have maps available on the Heartland Greenway website. So encourage whether you want to see big picture maps of the entire project, state level maps, or even down to the very nitty gritty details of each of the counties along that footprint. We have all of that available on our website. But across that footprint and then looking even further into phase two, will ultimately be well over 30 processors. A bulk of those are ethanol plants. We have 31 committed shippers along our line. 30 of those 31 dots that you'll see on the map or shippers are ethanol plants. We do also have an ammonia facility represented on the footprint too. But at its, again, taking it kind of bigger picture at its core, what that looks to do is effectively help those ethanol producers capture their CO2 that's coming off the fermentation process right now, compress it into for all intensive purposes, a liquid. It's technically a supercritical. It'll transport through that network of new build pipeline infrastructure. And those that have seen kind of the project overview will see that there's kind of effectively a fork in the road at a certain point where we want not only a diverse amount of on-ramps or those that are shipping CO2 on the footprint, but also a diverse amount of off-ramps. And so we're developing the sequestration regions where that CO2 can ultimately or have the opportunity to be injected deep underground, about a mile underground in a special area that has the geology for that. We're also developing a handful of other what we'll call off-ramps, be that through terminal infrastructure and or other opportunities for further utilization of CO2 down the road based on kind of the market demands that our shippers are seeing. So I know that was a long roundabout way of explaining what we're working on, but it's got a lot of facets to it.
Yeah, thank you so much for walking through all of that. So could you talk a little bit more about the utilization piece of this and the partnerships that you and your team are kind of building and creating? I know I saw that there was a recent announcement, I want to say about a month ago. Is that correct?
We've had a couple announcements actually here in recent weeks, specifically along the side of carbon kind of credits as well as carbon utilization. So you remember at the onset of this podcast, we talked about and I described our project as truly a carbon management platform. Now, sequestration is an important piece of that, but so too is access to critical utilization markets. So that's important to one, why we've proposed and we'll put both terminal assets so that there's ability for our shippers to be able to take that CO2 and sell it into existing utilization markets. A lot of those right now being, think the bubbles in your drinks. They use quite a bit in food and beverage processing and refrigeration, dry ice as well. But there's a lot of technologies that are out there that are looking at further processing that CO2 molecule and turning it into something else, be a bio-based plastic or biopolymer, or specifically new waves of bio-based fuels as well. And so so that's where I'd highlight, we did sign a letter of intent, I should say, as well with Infinium. So they are an e-fuels manufacturer. They're looking at developing a site where they would take CO2 off the line and further process that as part of their processes to create e-fuels. I think we're beginning to hear a lot more about, again, what those new uses of CO2 can potentially be. The other facet that's really important about carbon management is not necessarily, we hear a lot about the tax credits or compliance programs like the LCFS, low carbon fuel standard that exists out in California, or the carbon fuel program up in Canada. However, one of the other very large growing opportunities that exists in the carbon space is the voluntary carbon markets. And that is sheerly just a matching of willing sellers of credits, right? Those that have changed their production practices to take carbon that otherwise was being emitted into the atmosphere and not doing that, and or removing it and permanently sequestering it. And those that are buyers looking to be able to offset emissions associated with their practices. And so that necessarily creates what has been coined kind of the voluntary carbon markets, where there's the exchange of those credits. And that's really where I'd venture into to talk about our latest announcement, also with Puro being one of the most renowned carbon registries out in the marketplace right now. What they effectively do is serve as a third-party verifier. They serve as the registry for that credit marketplace of sorts. So we'll be working with our shippers to help facilitate such that they can be certified to bring credits forward and be part of that exchange or that voluntary marketplace as well.
Right, yeah. And I'm curious what Puro Earth's role is. I know they kind of verify credits, and I remember seeing that in the press release, but could you talk a little bit more about what's involved with that verification and validation process of these different CO2 removal credits, and kind of how that fits in the value chain of ethanol producers giving you the CO2, and how do they fit into this, both from the producer standpoint and from Navigator's standpoint as the carbon management platform?
Sure. So what I think at its foundational level, what the partnership with Puro does is provide additional value opportunity for all of the shippers, again, a bulk of those being ethanol plants, to access a diverse marketplace, right? So they have the ability to access the federal programs, the tax credits and things. They have the ability to access marketplaces that have carbon-based credits for the fuel sources. Again, we talked about that being California and Canada being the predominant ones there. But having diverse legs of that stool is incredibly important. And so as the voluntary carbon marketplace has developed, so too have entities like Puro to be that third-party verifier, right? So something that can come in and provide a stamp of approval that when a business is coming in, an interested buyer, right, is coming in to buy a credit, that there is something substantiated behind that credit that they are effectively retiring truly has been traced back to a ton of carbon that was truly sequestered or removed from the atmosphere. And so having that third party kind of verifying entity is incredibly important to ensure that you're maintaining the integrity of these voluntary marketplaces.
Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense. And I'm curious if Pure Earth is going to be doing it solely for the whole carbon management platform, or will you be looking for other partners as well to kind of help handle, I guess, the capacity, the amount of volume you guys are hoping to move and transport, or is Pure Earth able to handle all of that themselves?
Sure. So I think we're always looking for additional partners, be it shippers, be it those that can continue to add valuable market opportunities to the project and the initiative broadly. So to say that it's a one size fits all, I wouldn't go that far. But we are continuing to add additional partners to both the operations of it as well as kind of the ancillary benefits via carbon management credits and such like that. I think another thing to take a step back is we talk regularly about wanting to make sure that we're developing a piece of infrastructure that provides value today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and decades beyond. And that means making sure that you're evolving as the marketplaces continue to evolve. If we took a step back and think about, the carbon marketplaces of today compared to 10 years ago, it really wasn't in existence the way that we have today. And so we need to make sure that we're putting forward a project and we're developing something that can continue to evolve and meet those those needs as customer demands evolve, the marketplace demands continue to evolve.
Could you talk a little bit about the added benefit and value that comes with the carbon management platform with having kind of the option to be involved in the voluntary carbon market, which from what I understand is a growing market? Can you talk about the benefits of that?
So I do think that, one, a lot of our carbon-based programs to date are based on specific marketplaces. So again, we talk a lot about Canada, we talk a lot about California, or the West Coast, I should say, predominantly, that has LCFS or low carbon fuel standard markets. But we use a lot of ethanol in other places around the country and frankly around the world. And so, the federal tax programs are still applicable in those cases where that ethanol goes into maybe a Midwestern market or an East Coast market or a Southern United States market. What the voluntary carbon marketplace also allows for is a credit-based valuation in those cases via the voluntary marketplace that doesn't exist because you don't have the state level compliance program like you have in a California or a Washington or an Oregon or a Canada. So it really does allow increased valuation for the producers.
That's fantastic. Okay, so Elizabeth, did you have any final thoughts either on kind of the utilization piece of this carbon management system that you and your team are working on, or on kind of the Pure Earth partnership and what that means for your project moving forward?
Sure. I think just in closing, I've mentioned before, but carbon is something that's continuing to grow as a quantifier of value, exceptionally so in the transportation fuel sector. We've seen that via the state programs and some of our federal incentives, but carbon is going to continue to be a quantifiable, characteristic that will determine the value of a variety of goods and services and products that we bring to market. So we're looking forward to continuing to grow our partnerships both throughout the liquid fuel sector and ethanol, but also throughout many sectors throughout that supply chain, and continue to add value up and down. Because also when you're looking at carbon management, it is really looked at from a life cycle perspective. So the more that we can incorporate carbon management throughout that supply chain or throughout the life cycle of a product coming to market, really the more competitive those markets, those end products are moving forward. And that takes not only physical infrastructure, it takes a whole lot of accounting and a lot of very good partnerships with good innovative businesses. And we're excited about some of those recent announcements that we've had, and some of the new ones that will be coming out here very soon as well.
Awesome. That's really exciting. Thank you so much for your time, Elizabeth.
I appreciate being here. Thank you so much, Katie.